All righty. So, as I said, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Opal Elliott, and I'm a volunteer community ambassador with AARP right here in Northern Virginia. And for those of you who are not familiar with Northern Virginia, we're just a stone's throw from the nation's capital, part of what is called fondly the DMV, the District, Maryland, and Virginia. So, thank you so much again for joining us today on Tuesday Explorers as we continue our month in highlighting the great contributions of our military. You're attending a Sisterhood of Service, History of Women in the Military. So I'll be joined today by my AARP friend and colleague, Don Harmon. You see his picture there, and he is our technical guru. Rest assured, we're in good hands. So as always, we ask that you place all your questions in the Q&A box found at the bottom right of the screen. We will get to as many of your questions as we can in our allotted time at the end of our speaker's presentation. This session will run approximately 80 minutes, depending upon the number of questions we receive. So a little bit about AARP. From our earliest beginnings, AARP championed lifelong learning. That's why AARP Virginia is thrilled to bring you our 5th year of Tuesday Explorers, a lifelong learning program offered every Tuesday from January through the end of May, 3 o'clock Eastern Time for curious explorers just like you. So for more than 65 years, AARP has been a wise friend and fierce defender, helping individuals to ensure their money, their health, their happiness live as long as they do. AARP has earned that reputation through providing trusted information, tools, advocacy, health, and financial and information for the security of older Americans and to empower them to choose how they live as they age. Just early this morning, I was at a workshop hosting a workshop here in Falls Church, Virginia, and there had to be at least 80 older Americans who had come to hear about fraud and scams, and AARP was making a presentation. It's things like that that we do to keep you informed. So AARP helps you protect yourself and your loved ones from fraud. Get healthy, stay healthy, care for loved ones, make connections like we're doing today, plan a trip, learn new technologies, attend a workshop, and sometimes we just do things that just have fun. Like sometimes we'll have a wine and tasting sips. We always provide information, but we just have fun. I hope you will continue to take advantage of these opportunities and more. So now it's indeed a pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Marilla Cushman. Marilla is the senior advisor to the president of Military Women's Memorial Foundation. Marilla joined the foundation staff in March 1997 as the Director of Public Relations and Development and served in that capacity until June 2021, when she assumed her current position as Senior Advisor to the President. She provides overall advice and assistance to the President on all issues related to the operation of the foundation and memorial. Prior to joining the foundation, she served nearly 25 years in the U.S. Army, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. Her assignments included Special Assistant for Public Affairs to the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Chief Media Inquiries, Headquarters Department of the Army, Chief Public Relation Affairs Plans and Policy Division, Headquarters U.S. Army Europe, Executive Director to the Defense Secretary's Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services, and Program Manager, Advertising and Sales Promotions for the Army's Be All You Can Be campaign. I remember that well. U.S. Army Recruiting Command. She is a graduate of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, a summa cum laude graduate of the University of Maine with a BS in education. She also attended graduate school at the University of Kansas. What a career. Marilla, the Zoom screen is all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Opal, and hello, everyone. I can't thank you enough for letting me join you for this Tuesday Explorers. What fun to be with you and to learn about what you're doing as well. It certainly is indeed a pleasure to be here. So first, I want to thank Amber Sultane and, of course, Opal for reaching out with the invitation and for your interest in our nation's military history. It seems especially fitting as we approach Memorial Day, a day set aside for Americans to reflect on the sacrifices made by our military personnel and a day to honor their service. So thank you again for giving me the privilege of joining you. So today, less than 1% of our nation's population fulfills the enormous responsibility of an American service member, and we owe them all an enormous debt of gratitude. But today, I'm going to talk to you about the women. The legions of women, every one of them leaders, trailblazers in their own way, who came before us, served alongside their male counterparts, and are serving today in capacities we never dreamed possible just a few years ago. Women who made it possible for the Susies and the Marys and the Marillas to serve and to lead and to make a difference. Today, I have the privilege of telling you about the some 17% of the minuscule 1% America's military women. It's always a pleasure to tell folks about the rich legacy of women's service to the nation and talk about their journey. For we are indeed, a sisterhood of service that's been blazing trails since 1775. So while nearly 3 million women have served in or with our military, beginning with the American Revolution, we hardly ever hear about them in our history books. So I always welcome the opportunity to lift up their stories and talk about them whenever I can. So a little aside, a World War I Navy yeoman from Rhode Island, her name was Janet Taylor. She seemed to know that women's service might be overlooked when she wrote this little poem. It's a sweet little poem. I am a woman and a veteran, and I say it with great pride. I gave the very best I had. There's nothing I need hide. I have the right to know that the burden that I bore will always be remembered when they tell about the war. So if we begin at our beginning, women did serve with the Continental Army. We don't know how many, but we do know they served as cooks, laundresses, and sutlers. They nursed the wounded, and some, like Margaret Corbin, took the place of her husband, who was a soldier, when he fell in battle. And Margaret was indeed a trailblazer. And others disguised themselves as men, like Deborah Sampson, who served as Robert Shirtliff, a soldier of the 4th Massachusetts Regiment. Deborah fought in several battles. She was wounded and treated her own wounds. Not until she was hospitalized with a fever did a doctor discover she was a woman. And you can imagine she was quickly but honorably discharged. So Deborah indeed was a leader. It seems the same pattern followed with the War of 1812 and in the Mexican-American War, where women served with the military in some capacity or disguised themselves as men. Roles expanded somewhat in the Civil War, with women serving as spies and many serving on the battlefield as volunteer nurses, but nonetheless they led. And there were other women leaders like Dorothea Dix, who organized and recruited nurses for the war effort, and Clara Barton, who developed a medical supply system. And there was Dr. Mary Walker. Mary Walker was a surgeon who she was initially turned down by the Army. Why? Because she was a woman. but she provided critical care to the wounded, particularly those who were in danger of amputation. Dr. Walker is the only woman in our history to receive the Medal of Honor. She was indeed a leader. Women nurses during the Spanish-American War did such a good job serving with the Army that the Army decided it needed a permanent corps of nurses and established the Army Nurse Corps in 1901, albeit with very stringent provisions. For example, they weren't permitted to be married and they didn't have rank. They were simply called nurse. And why were they simply called nurse? Because the male members of Congress didn't want women ordering men around. And that's a true story. So later in 1908, the Navy Nurse Corps was established. It was 1924 before retirement was permitted and relative rank was established, but still these women led. Then World War I came along and things were about to change dramatically for the military and for women. Fearing the growing manpower shortage, the Secretary of the Navy, a fellow named Josephus Daniels, asked if he could enlist women to ease this pending shortage. And the answer was no. And why? Because by law, the enlistees had to be a citizen and they had to be male. So time went on. 1916, the Naval Reserve Act was passed, allowing more recruits. Nonetheless, those shortages continued, and once again, Josephus Daniels stepped up and asked, can we enlist women in the reserves? And sure enough, the Reserve Act only required the recruit be a citizen. So he quickly began to enlist women in the Navy Reserve and as clerks, draftsmen, translators, recruiters, and the like. And as a result, some 10,000 women served in the Navy, a little over 300 in the Marine Corps, and a handful in the Coast Guard. Every one of them were trailblazers, and I can't imagine what that was like during the World War I to have these women aboard. But every one of them were trailblazers, and indeed, 20 of them after the war petitioned to form the first American Legion post, post number 2 in the nation, and I happen to be a member of post number 2, a proud member. The only service that didn't permit women to serve, other than nurses, was my service, the Army. But General Pershing, needing qualified competent telephone operators, because these new telephone machines were like computers today, newly fielded. So he persisted until the Army contracted 223 women, and they nicknamed them the Hello Girls, and sent them to France to take over the telephone duties. And though promised veteran status, when they went, they ended up fighting for 45 years before such was granted. And Pershing would say that that the war ended at least 6 months early because of the service of these women. An extraordinary story. So, and there's an excellent documentary titled The Hello Girls, which is definitely worth a watch. And I'm also proud to say that legislation was passed just this past December awarding these Hello Girls the Congressional Gold Medal for their extraordinary service. So Army and Navy nurses during the war served out stateside and overseas, treating the sick and wounded and the thousands afflicted by that era's worldwide pandemic, the Spanish flu. A fact to remember is that not one of these women who served during World War I could vote, even though they raised their right hand and promised to support and defend. They didn't have the basic right to vote. But their service became a major and telling factor in the fight for women's suffrage and passage of the 19th Amendment. Always before, the argument had been that women didn't fulfill the full responsibilities of a citizen. That is, they didn't serve in the military. Even though the right to vote was won in 1920, by 1925, the Congress, who was so irritated, I think, with Secretary Daniels that they corrected that loophole in the law, that reserve law that said you only had to be a citizen. And once again, only nurses were permitted to serve. So it wasn't until World War II when again a crisis called for the recruitment of women in addition to nurses. And despite fits and starts by my service, the Army, which again was reluctant to have women in the Army, every service embraced and actively recruited women. One of my favorite lines during the deliberation in Congress about passing legislation permitting women to serve was from a congressman who said, "I think it is a reflection upon the courageous manhood of the country to pass a law inviting women to join the armed forces in order to win a battle. Take the women into the armed service. Who then will do the cooking, the washing, the mending, the humble homey tasks to which every woman has devoted herself? Think of the humiliation. What has become of the manhood of America?" Thank goodness others saw otherwise. So after much debate, both the Congress and the Army, the law creating the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was signed on May 15, 1942, so the WAAC. The WAAC was run by the Army, but it was not a part of the Army. The recruits signed no binding contract. There were no benefits. They didn't get the same pay, nor was the rank structure the same. There were no entitlements for dependents, no Geneva Convention protection when they were sent overseas, and they were sent overseas. They were not supervised or classified men, and they didn't have veteran status. And thanks to Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune, an early civil rights activist, the WAAC did permit a small percentage of African American women to serve. Needless to say, that WAAC concept didn't work, and within a few years, the conversion to the Women's Army Corps had taken place. The other services looked at women's service entirely different, and authorized them from the beginning to serve in the Navy and the Marine Corps, which was in July of 42. And in November of 42, the Coast Guard did the same. Only the Army created a separate organization for women. The original forecast for the number of women needed was about 83,000. But very quickly, that total requested by commanders had grown to about 1.5 million. And in the end, some 400,000 women served in the military during World War II for the duration of the war plus 6 months. Every single one of them were trailblazers. Army and Navy nurses and Women's Army Corps members served in every theater of the war, and they did all kinds of things outside the traditional fields of administration and medicine, such as aircraft maintenance, air traffic control, cryptography, and so much more. 89 of them, nurses and mostly nurses and dietitians, were prisoners of war, most held for 3 years in the Philippines by the Japanese. Toward the end of the war, Navy Waves and Marine Corps women served in Hawaii, and a few Coast Guard spars, the spars were their motto name, served in Alaska, and both of which were territories and considered overseas duty. And because of Hollywood, many now are familiar with the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion, the only predominantly all-Black Women's Army Corps unit that served overseas during the war. Their job was to clear warehouses full of backlogged mail, literally millions of pieces that had not been delivered to soldiers, in part because of the Battle of the Bulge. They were first sent to Birmingham, England, with 6 months to complete the job. They did it in 3. And because, when you do a good job in the Army, they give you another one. The unit was sent to Rouen, France, where they faced the very same enormous task and where they again achieved success. And so besides recently released Hollywood movie, there's a terrific documentary as well titled The 6888 No Male, Low Morale, which was their motto. It's also worth a watch. And then many of you know there were the WASP, the Women Air Force Service pilots, 1,074 of them who flew more than 60 million miles back and forth across the United States, ferrying aircraft and supplies and towing targets. Every one of them were contract. And as soon as the war was done in Europe, they were all sent home summarily. One day they were in, the next day they were not. And there was the Civil Air Patrol, today's official civilian auxiliary to the Air Force. And women pilots patrolled the coast looking for German submarines. And then there was the Cadet Nurse Corps, an incredible program which trained more than 124,000 nurses in about 1,100 nursing schools across the United States in a 3-year professional program. The graduates were to serve in the military or the public health service when they graduated. And again, it was an amazing program which truly professionalized nursing here in the US. So World War II was a sea change for the nation and for women. Women went places and did things American women had never done or been before. And for the first time, they could use the GI Bill, they could go to school on their own, and they became our teachers, our business owners. They filled important government and other jobs. They literally changed America, and they indeed blazed a trail. And they filled such critical roles in the military that Generals Eisenhower and Marshall joined forces with Congresswomen Edith North Rogers from Massachusetts and Margaret Shea Smith from Maine, who led the way in establishing legislation to give women a permanent place in the military. It's called the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, was signed into law June 12 in 1948. So in just a few days, we'll be celebrating the 77th anniversary of this game-changing legislation. And many of the states across America have recognized June 12 as Women Veterans Recognition Day in honor of this legislation. And while the legislation did contain major provisions that would impact women's service well into, well, as late as 2016, so some nearly 70 years. It nonetheless was a crack that would eventually break open that glass ceiling. Quickly, some of the major provisions that the legislation included were that women were limited to 2% of the force. So they didn't have a great it was easy to be marginalized, basically 2% of the force. Their grades were set. There was a ceiling. They were 05s, either lieutenant colonel or commander. Women could be appointed to the next higher grade, 06 colonel, captain, if they were the chief of that woman's component, so chief of the WAC. For the period of the time they were in that position. When that was done, they would revert back to the next lower grade until they were retired and could retire as an 06. So with that grade cap, needless to say, you never heard of a woman admiral or a woman general. And why? Because the male members of Congress felt women would be going through menopause, and therefore they would make irrational decisions. So I got to tell you, folks, you can't make this stuff up. So women were prohibited from being assigned to combat ships or aircraft, which the services interpreted as all ships and all aircraft except for hospitals. It also established the Women's Army Corps as a separate corps in the Army, which remained in place until 1978. In fact, when I entered the Army, I entered it as a member of the Women's Army Corps. So while women could be married, they were treated as single members with no benefits like medical, commissary, or exchange privileges for their spouse. And they had no quarters allowance at the married rate. This was the case unless the spouse was dependent upon her for his chief support. In addition, children were not considered dependents unless the father was dead or she was the chief provider. The service secretary could prescribe how women trained and qualified for military duty and the kind of duty to which they would be assigned. Thus, they permitted all kinds of different prohibitions over the years, including pregnancy. So many of us have heard about women having to leave the military because they were pregnant. No dependent children. Duty stations were restricted. Training was restricted as well. And these provisions proved to be major barriers to the progress for women well into the 1970s, and particularly those related to combat, well, as I said, 2013 and 2017. So things were very different for women, military women, during the next years following that 1948 act. Than what we know today. They didn't fly, they didn't go to sea in ships, they didn't work in maintenance or any of the non-traditional fields. The academies and ROTC programs were closed to women. If they found to be pregnant, they were immediately discharged, so maternity uniforms certainly weren't part of the inventory. No enlisted women would be assigned to a remote site, and almost never were women officers. Only in rare instances could an enlisted woman be assigned to a base that didn't have a woman's unit, like a WAC company. If a servicewoman married a civilian, he was not entitled to an ID card, permitted PX, medical, or commissary privileges, nor was she eligible for married housing or a housing allowance unless her spouse was chiefly dependent upon her. If a woman married a man with dependent children under the age of 18, she had to get out. There was one colonel's position in the line, and women were limited to 2% of the force. There were many policy changes about marriage with respect to entry and ease of discharge. There was charm training, not weapons training. In fact, many of these conditions were still true well into the 60s and some into the 70s. And there were other provisions relating to combat. Nonetheless, the 1948 legislation was truly a game changer for military women. It was a foot in the door, a crack in the glass ceiling, an opportunity to have a military career. The Korean and Vietnam Wars were primarily nurses' war, with only Army nurses on the ground in Korea and Navy and Air Force nurses on hospital ships and aircraft. And nonetheless, these women still led the way. In Vietnam, some 80% of the 7,500 military women who served there were nurses. And it wasn't till General Westmoreland asked that Women's Army Corps members be assigned to help with administrative duties was the logjam broken. And you see this trend throughout. It's all about need. Things change when they need us. So in the end, women Marines in Vietnam were enlisted. Officer and enlisted women totaled a total of 36. That's all the number of Marines that were in Vietnam. But Vietnam had an additional impact on women's service, partially to relieve pressure on the draft for this unpopular war. It was decided to recruit more women. This necessitated the 2% ceiling and lifting of the rank limitations, with the first women promoted to general officer in 1970. Also in the late 1960s and 70s, more changes began to take place. The Constitution, courtrooms, lawyers, and lawsuits began to be used by military women to seek equity. Listen to this story from a woman named Lieutenant Commander Alice Cook. Alice Cook returned from vacation with her husband in 1967 with what she self-diagnosed as the flu. 13 years into her Navy nurse career, she thought she'd know the symptoms. 30 days later, she was discharged because she was pregnant. What she says is what should have been such a happy news for us destroyed my career. But after a 10-year legal battle, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court ruled unconstitutional that military regulations requiring discharge of mothers with minor children and awarded Lieutenant Commander Cook 10 years back pay, reinstatement, and a chance to complete her military career. Yay. So over the next decade, the women's movement, the end of the draft, and the implementation of the all-volunteer force in 1973 propelled the service of women forward. Also in 1973, entitlements to benefits were extended for women as a result of a 1971 lawsuit against the Secretary of Defense by a young Air Force First Lieutenant physical therapist named Sharon Frontiero, who was married to a civilian. Sharon was suffering financially because, unlike her male colleagues, she didn't get a quarters allowance, nor could she live in base housing. Her husband didn't get an ID card and couldn't use the PX, commissary, or the medical facilities. So she sued. She was assigned in Montgomery, Alabama. So she sued in the state of Alabama, and the courts threw it out. But the case was picked up by the American Civil Liberties Union, and a young lawyer named Ruth Bader Ginsburg took that case all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled it unconstitutional for women not to receive the same benefits as men. And it not only applied to military women, but women everywhere. But with no draft, recruiting was really, really tough. So as the needs of the services became more difficult, and I'll stress needs again, women were trained and assigned to more fields, breaking down barriers and leading the way. The late 70s and 80s brought more change with ROTC and the academies open to women and still more job opportunities. By the first Gulf War, 1990-91, the military couldn't deploy without women as they filled critical jobs and leadership roles. And we saw the first deployment of women at the beginning of a conflict since the invasion of North Africa in World War II. We also learned this modern battlefield had no front line. Thus, shielding women from combat, from harm, could no longer be our primary assignment rule. So in 1991, the prohibition against women on combat aircraft was repealed. And in 1993, the restriction related to women on combat ships fell away. And still, more jobs and opportunities open to women as they broke down barriers and cracked the glass ceiling. Like World War II, the global war on terror has brought enormous change to our military and the role of military women. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan challenged the ground combat rules and reinforced the reality of this fluid battlefield. These wars demonstrated that combat knows no gender. During the past 2 decades, women have risen to the rank of 4-star general and admiral. They've commanded naval battle groups, carrier strike forces, and combat air wings. A woman served as the chief of naval operations, the most senior position in the Navy, and another was the commandant of the Coast Guard. There are ship drivers, fighter pilots, tank drivers, and Army Rangers. They serve on submarines, drug interdiction vessels. They've taken on new roles as members of female engagement and cultural support teams, where they interact with local women, providing critical medical support and other skills, along with collecting invaluable intelligence. Every one of them are leaders and trailblazers in their own way as well. But the growing opportunities for women comes with sacrifice. More than 1,100 wear the Purple Heart, having been wounded in action, and 179 are among the casualties. never to come home to their families. So since the birth of the nation to today's modern military, women have stepped forward whenever the country needed them, ever ready to serve, even when service meant sacrifice, assignments and promotions were limited, benefits weren't equal, those with whom they served didn't want them, and even when they couldn't vote. In the face of it all, women just wanted to serve. So at the Military Women's Memorial, America finally has the opportunity to say thanks to these women patriots and tell the remarkable story of service. Located at the gateway to Arlington National Cemetery, the nation's most hallowed ground, the memorial and its 33,000 square foot education center chronicles their service and preserves their individual stories for generations to come. Today, more than 326,500 women's records of service have been captured and preserved here in the memorial's register. Stories like that of 1st Cav Division Private First Class Leslie Jackson, who just down the road in Richmond, who lost her life while supporting Operation Iraqi Freedom. And Chief Master Sergeant Shelby Wood, from Forest, Virginia, who was the first woman in the Commonwealth of Virginia National Guard to be a senior enlisted advisor. And there was former Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass, just down the road in Chantilly. And there are hundreds of others who proudly call Virginia and the rest of America home. Today, some 18,600 active duty women and veteran women, living and deceased, who call the Commonwealth of Virginia home, have their record of service preserved for all time at the Military Women's Memorial. With more than 110,000 women veterans in the Commonwealth, we here in the Commonwealth need to help them take their rightful and visible place in history by registering their record of service with the memorial. And our other friends out there across the United States, we can give you the same kind of statistics so you can help your colleagues, your battle buddies, your friends in your state take their rightful place in history as well. The Register is the largest repository of servicewomen's stories in the world. But while substantial, it only represents about 10% of the women who've served. Thus, we are in the midst of a national registration campaign to bring national awareness to the 3 million women who have served and to their contributions to our national defense, beginning with the American Revolution. The story of service, of women's service to this nation will never, ever be complete until every story is captured and preserved. And you can help. If you are a servicewoman or you know of a servicewoman, past or present, living or deceased, please help her take her rightful and visible place in history by registering her service here at the Military Women's Memorial. Registration is easy. Just go to our website, militarywomen's.org, click on Create an Account or Register Your Service, and just follow the prompts. You can create or update your own account or register another deserving woman by creating an account for her. And you can search the entire database for your fellow service women, your battle buddies, your shipmates, past and present. 3 years ago, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Women's Memorial. On that day, nearly 28 years ago, some 40,000 military women and their family and friends came together on October 18, 1997, when the ribbon was cut, and to be a witness when the face of monumental Washington was changed forever. Finally, among the monuments to our military heroes, a woman's story would be told, and henceforth, among those faces of courage would be that of a woman. And I just want to give you a little taste of what that was like.
Marilla, was this to have sound with it? I'm not hearing the sound. Was sound to be with this one? Okay, we've lost the sound with it. Let's see. I don't know if Don can help with that.
I'm sorry if you folks couldn't hear that. I'll continue here though. For nearly 28 years, the Military Women's Memorial has provided our nation with a place to honor, learn, and be inspired by the stories of the extraordinary women patriots who preserved our freedoms, a few of which have been highlighted here today. I hope you'll want to learn more about the Military Women's Memorial, its programs and activities, as well as register the service of an eligible woman. And please plan to visit. I would love the opportunity to give you a personal tour of this one-of-a-kind, the nation's only memorial to tell the story of women's service. The memorial is a 501c3 nonprofit, and it is not federally funded. So 75% of the funds that operate and maintain the memorial are actually from the very women it honors. So we are always happy to accept donations. So thank you very much for inviting me to join you today and for letting me talk just a little bit about the legions of women who've made it possible for those who followed and to serve our great nation. But before I go, I do want to turn our thoughts to Memorial Day. Today, America is the home to some 16.5 million veterans, and I, as well as many, many of you here probably present today, are proud to stand among them. All once young men and women themselves, they left their homes and families and everything they knew, promising to support and defend the Constitution and protect our freedoms in peace and war. A simple oath on its face, but a life-changing, life-giving commitment of which thousands gave their lives. But it's not enough to say it, we need to show it, and Memorial Day is about showing it. Those of us who've been assigned at the Pentagon or visited the Pentagon at one time or another may recall a huge framed painting along the grand stairway leading up to the Secretary of Defense's office. The painting is of a family kneeling at the altar with the passage from Isaiah 6:8. Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And the response, here I am, send me. In my mind's eye, over countless decades, I imagine this same call, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And the generations of service members responding, here I am, send me. So on Memorial Day, we remember the service of the fallen and honor their sacrifice. As I thought about Memorial Day as well, I also thought about those provocative words inscribed for the ages on the walls of the Korean War Veterans Memorial. They read, our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met. What incredible selfless service. So in closing, I share this story, not about the Military Women's Memorial or Memorial Day, but as a reminder of the extraordinary service of our nation's military men and women. In 2021, America lost an extraordinary patriot, a veteran, a lifelong servant of this nation, General Colin Powell. At his memorial service, son Michael, in eulogizing him, called him a great lion with a big heart, and went on to speak about holding his father's hands during their final minutes together. Michael spoke about reflecting on the many things that hand had done during those extraordinary life of service, from squeezing his hand when he was a kid, to signing report cards and fixing cars, to saluting soldiers, signing treaties and war orders. General Colin Powell, the consummate veteran, lived a life of service. So today, or any day that you shake a veteran's hand, I hope you will pause to reflect on the words of Michael Powell and think about the countless acts of service that hand you hold has done for you and this great nation of ours. And yes, for people they never met. So to my fellow veterans, I salute you. Thank you for your service. And thank you for giving me a little bit of your time today.
Well, Marilla, wow, I'm moved and overwhelmed by your presentation, and we have some questions. And I'm going to open the floor to you with some of the questions that we've gotten, and then
Okay.
we'll do wrap up. It was just wonderful. So,
Well, thank you so much.
just wonderful presentation, very moving, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the people that you mentioned that I know. So, thank you so much. But anyway, one of our questions was about your opinion of some of the things that's going on that may diminish the historic role of women in the military currently. And while AARP is nonpartisan, so we don't mm, comment on what this administration or that administration is doing, for me, military women have always been trailblazers, and they will not let their role in history ever be diminished. I don't know if you would like to comment on that. We don't comment on any administration, but what I heard
Sure.
today was these are women that will not let their history be diminished.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, Gopal. I mean, it's been, it's clear that women are intrepid souls, and they just wanted to serve. And despite the challenges, despite the fact that they were sometimes not wanted, nevertheless, they stood up, and women will continue to stand up. The mission here at the memorial, that's our mission. Our legislation the legislation that was passed, establishing this memorial was to build and operate a memorial that honored the service and told the stories of women's service to the nation. And that's what we're doing every single day. And we're preserving those stories. Actually, new ones come in every day. So that's our story.
All righty. So our next question would be, what advice would you give to young women who are considering a career in the military?
I would ask them to go for it. I think about that little World War I woman, Frida Harden, when she stood there at that podium on the day we dedicated, and think about, what she took away from her service, and how it changed the nation. And certainly, there are so many opportunities available to young people in today's military, from the technical side of the house, to war fighting, to flying aircraft. You can be a bands person playing in some of the premier bands here in the United States. You can be a chaplain. You can be anything in our military. And I would certainly encourage every young person to look at this seriously.
All righty. Thank you so much. And this is a fun one here. Uh, is a major an officer? And the answer is that is yes. But the person, I think they were more making a comment that Major Houlihan on MASH was in the Korean War. And since women could not, well, women were allowed in the Korean War. That's what you said, right? Did they get
Correct.
that wrong? So did they get that wrong in MASH or did they get it right?
There were nurse, she was a nurse.
Yes.
And certainly by that time, with this 1948 legislation, women were, more and more women, of course, were serving. But most of the women on the ground in Korea were nurses. And certainly they held ranks up to the rank of colonel, actually.
All righty. So we got to, many of us watch MASH, and so now we know historically they got it right, didn't they?
They got it right. They did
All right.
indeed.
Yes. Someone else has asked, do you know when women could first serve in the Coast Guard? They remember their cousin being in the Coast Guard, going to the Coast Guard Academy in the 70s. Uh, do you
Actually, that's a very good question. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Opal.
know?
Pardon me.
Go right ahead. Right.
Uh, the Coast Guard was kind of ahead of the other services. Women were serving or women were attending the Coast Guard Academy somewhat sooner, and I apologize, I don't quite remember the date when they were permitted to attend the Coast Guard Academy. But indeed, women served during World War II in the Coast Guard. And there was a bit of a hiatus after World War II, but have been serving, ever since. As I said, the commandant of the Coast Guard, the former commandant of the Coast Guard was a woman. Um,
Great. Thank you so much. And one question also was, what are some of the key initiatives and programs that Military Women's Memorial Foundation is currently working on?
Well, every year we, certainly our primary effort is to register the service of women so that this story is complete. And we've done some other fun things and gratifying things. We worked very hard to help get legislation passed for the Congressional Gold Medal for the Hello Girls, as well as the 6888. Their medal was just unveiled the end of April. So that's been um, um, a very gratifying initiative and an opportunity to be part of it. We're charged with operating this memorial. We're not necessarily while we're an advocate, obviously, of military women and the role of women in our military. As far as initiatives like on the Hill, or I'm not sure quite what the specifics are here, but we, as a nonprofit, we are we're not pushing legislation, so to speak. Or I think that's what the question was, is I think anyway, with respect to other initiatives that we have.
Yes, absolutely. And there's another question as to how can the community support and honor the contributions of women in the military? And I think you touched on that a little bit, but
Certainly the community in so many ways can assure that military women are always included whenever they have some program that honors their veterans, that their voice is there, their face is there. And certainly, as I said, we are encouraging the nation actually to help every woman who's ever served to take her rightful and visible place in history at this memorial. When you visit this 33,000 square foot memorial, the very heart of the memorial, the very center of it actually, is what we call the register room. So visitors can come and key in a name and and up pops this, like, sort of like you saw the baseball cards through our presentation, where a woman's picture's there, her awards and decorations, her memorable experience when she served, and it's an opportunity for to learn about your relative or your battle buddy, or about any woman who served in the military, and a wonderful way to pay tribute to her. Um, we also spend a lot of time with journalists and researchers. We have a very active or archive with some 8,000 individual donations from gosh, World War I items to items from today, women who've served today. We have wedding dresses that were made from parachute silk in World War II. Just some extraordinary pieces that, everyone kind of tells a story. We also have a substantial research library, about 5,000 different titles of publications by about military women. And we have about a 2,000 piece oral history collection, dating back to some women who served in World War One. So it's we spend, like I said, quite a bit of time with researchers, journalists, helping to tell that story of women's service to the nation.
Thank you so much, Marilla. One other question came through was the person had looked up the unsung heroes, women in the military, and they were trying to find a clip that we showed. First, let us apologize for the sound. Our technical person has told us that we will review the video again, the presentation, to see where there may have been a glitch. Someone shared with us that when in Zoom, when you share your video, you have to toggle sound to on, but we're not sure that's what had happened. But is there somewhere else that folks could see that video? Because I could tell with you, even without the sound, that it was moving. And
Yeah, there is a full-length video about that's called Unsung Heroes. Um, we have it on our YouTube channel.
mm-hmm.
If you go to let me see, if you go to, I'm going to mess us up if I go to it, but go to our website and click into our YouTube channel, and it is there as well as a number of other very interesting pieces that
Okay.
speak to women's service.
So they would go to the website and then look for the
Uh-huh.
YouTube channel.
Yeah, and go scroll to the bottom and just click into the YouTube channel.
Okay, that would help because I could tell myself that it was very moving. All
It
right,
is
and
very.
yes, you could really tell that. So one other question, Marilla, we have a question that asks, how has your experience in the U.S. Army influenced your work with Military Women's Memorial Foundation? And of course, I think it just runs all through it, but you tell us.
Thank you. That's very kind for them to even ask. I loved being in the Army. I had great jobs. I just,
Mm,
we were chatting before. I was always stunned at that the, that, the leadership would give us these jobs and you'd think, oh my gosh, and they just expected you to do it. So, you got to step up and you got to grow no matter what. And you have to take care of your soldiers and make sure that they're growing and have success as well as their families. So like I said, I really love the Army, and I look back obviously on it very fondly. But I have to tell you, my commitment to this memorial and the women who've served, I mean, certainly that has my service made a difference for that. But my commitment to the memorial and my sisters in service is um, overwhelming for me. Uh, I for once, I guess I had an opportunity to do something that was kind of sort of about me, right? Instead of war plans and answering media calls and things of that sort. Um, it was telling the story about my sisters, and educating the public. Um, and you do think about, what did we know in school about women in the service? Not, at least not in my time. Maybe, well, we knew MASH, right? So well, there had to be nurses there, right? But other than that, who knew? Who knew what women were doing in World War? Who knew they broke the code, right?
Mhm.
To During World War II. Who knew that a young sergeant in Vietnam saved, a company of Marines because of the intel that she was collecting? Who knew that? Who knew that um, we had women flying um, fighter aircraft I guess once we went into Iraq, we knew more about what women were doing, but it was, it was so gratifying to be able to sort of open up this incredible story to our kids, to other women, and certainly about with our fellow citizens as well. So thanks for asking that. I don't know if I answered it very well, but it's been enormously gratifying.
Well, that's just obvious from the presentation, and I can tell you that in the chat, so many people have said thank you for this eye-opening, wonderful presentation. I'll just read a few. You'll get a copy of the chat. Thank you for the great presentation. I'm a veteran and registered with the Military Women's Memorial. Another one. Wow, what a wonderful, informative, and very moving presentation. This is just another place to visit, and I can say, Marilla, from a personal perspective, being an Army spouse, but it just moved me almost really to tears. I think I shared with you earlier that my mother-in-law was in the Women's Army Corps, and when she married and became pregnant, she had to leave something that she really loved. But my husband's sister joined the Air Force and she was able to retire. She flew on those AWACS as the weapons control officer. So it was a long stretch for their family from Women's Army Corps to his sister retiring from the Air Force. I was just moved by, what struck me. I thought there's so many things that struck me, but the Hello Girls, that it took 45 years before they could get their veteran status, and that when there was a need, there we were, women stepping up to the challenge to support and sometimes save the country, like the triple eight women did with just lifting the morale of those men getting their mail. That was so important. Uh,
That's just an extraordinary story.
oh, extraordinary! I did
So,
see the
oh,
movie. Yes.
hmm
And
hmm
I would love to see the documentary, right? And General Dunwoody and General Reels. I was at Quantico working when General Reels came on board, and she probably was one of the last people that I met with when I left Quantico to go to work at Perscom in the Hoffman building, and she was the first, and it wasn't easy. I think she wrote an article after retiring about her task of being the first and the challenges she had faced. And I
hmm
think you highlighted that today. So on behalf of AARP, do you want to wrap up first and before I thank you more? Do you want to?
Oh, well, yeah, I just want to thank you all for your time today, and certainly for your interest in not only military women's story, but the story of, those millions of people who've stepped up to support and defend this nation, and the Constitution, and who stood shoulder to shoulder. So thank you very much for being a part of this today, and thank you for your kind words. Don't forget to register a servicewoman. Help her take her rightful and visible place in history.
Well, thank you so much, Marilla Cushman, for wow, what a moving presentation. And on behalf of AARP, we loved what you brought us today, and I'm certain that I can speak for Amber that we hope you come back because your
Great.
story We've reached a lot of people today, and your story needs to continue to be told. We'd love to get your feedback today on today's program and ideas for future programs. So you'll be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the survey. You'll also get a link to this presentation that you are clear to share with whoever you want. Spread the word. In addition, you'll receive a copy of today's program. So Tuesday Explorers will continue next week, and we invite you to join us again on May 27th as we explore behind the headstones, stories of heroes at Arlington Cemetery. And I hope and I know there's some heroes that call themselves women there. So in the chat box, you'll see a link to register for next week's program. And until that time, happy exploring. Come back. You never know what you'll learn. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.